week. Baseball with the Orioles in and around first place, beating up on the Red Sox and waiting on the Blue Jays to come to Camden Yards, as well as John Harbaugh beating up on some football players on the backfields, but not too much because it is mandatory camp time. We're hearing from lots of Ravens players and coaches this week before we go into the down period where everybody runs off to the Caribbean or someplace in Florida and gets a tan before training camp. This guy ran off on me, and I haven't heard from him in quite some time. I used to see him at Super Bowls and boxing matches and baseball games and bringing his boy up to Baltimore from USA Today. He is the longtime columnist and my longtime friend. He's now freelancing, doing all sorts of things for, old guy magazines, although he'll dispute that, as well as USA Today, Sky Sports, and also making some documentary films. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Johnny Saraceno. That's Jonny Saraceno. And many of you remember him from ESPN and late night boxing. And Saraceno, it took me 2 weeks to find you, man. I wanted to talk some Ali with you and just catch up with you. And, you did sports journalism in front of my face and under my nose and in my newspaper and in every hotel, airport I ever checked into. There you were. And Christine Brennan's still doing it, of course, at USA Today. But how are you? It's good to find you, my man.
Nestor, it's great to be with you today. And, it's been an interesting journey. I left USA Today in 2013. I took a buyout, and you know what's happened to my industry. It's basically been in a meltdown.
Hey, that's my industry now. I took a buyout from the Sun in 92, okay? So I hear you, bro. We saw it sort of circling the drain, and I would drive past the Baltimore Sun printing facility over in Port Covington. You go through the tunnel, you pass it, and I thought to myself, even in 2007 and 8 and 9, I'm like, what are they going to print there when these phones start catching on, And, I've watched so many people do different things, but you were so great on television and on boxing, and I guess the other thing that you were so famous for in boxing is also in some sort of deterioration here, and, the death of Ali sort of closes the door on a large chapter of the Cosell, Ali, old media, and boxing world, right?
That's a good point. It's a bygone era. We were friends and family were discussing this in Louisville. I was there for the funeral and the memorial service the following day. And it's a bygone era, Nestor. And there's never going to be a Muhammad Ali. Never. For a whole host of reasons that we could discuss for an hour. And his relationship with Cosell was just a wonderful one. I was fortunate enough. We did a magazine on Ali in 2010, and we just republished it. And there's a nice piece in there about Cosell and the Ali relationships and all the funny anecdotes. Billy Crystal gave me a wild anecdote as they're standing there by the casket. I hope people will go online to read it or buy it on their newsstands and get the rest of the story. But it's never going to be the same, and boxing certainly has had its peaks and valleys over the last century. It's in a trough right now. Boxing, to a large degree, depends upon star power to get fans interested in a couple of major fighters, people who have something to offer the general public beyond just the sport of boxing.
But that's what Ali was, right? My wife's pissed at Ali over the Frazier stuff and stuff. I said, honey, Vince McMahon's old man would bring guys in SS uniforms and look like Nazis and figure out how to get Sergeant Slaughter on the other side to sell tickets. And then, they would bring Pedro Morales in and make him the most Puerto Rican, and Ivan Putski was the most Polish man. I don't think he was Polish. And I'm pretty sure Chief Jay Strongbow wasn't even a Native American, but that's the way tickets were sold, and having a big mouth and having brashness was part of you're going to pay to see me get my ass kicked or not.
Right.
And that's all boxing has is see me get my ass kicked or not, and it has tribal alliances. I'm black, I'm Portuguese, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Dominican. That's the way that sport was sold forever, and it's not very politically correct right now, right?
No, well, Floyd Mayweather just made a fortune off what you just said. Half the people love him, his brashness, his cockiness, how he's out there with his money. And a lot of people just want to see him get his ass kicked. And the same way with Ali. And it's funny how you bring up the wrestling analogies, because Muhammad Ali largely exists, that persona, in terms of self-promotion, not the religious, political, social Ali, because of Gorgeous George. I don't know if you're aware of this, but when Ali first went down to Miami Beach to train with Angelo Dundee at the Fifth Street Gym in the early 60s after he won the gold medal in Rome, he went to a wrestling show. And Gorgeous George was a star featured performer that night. And Ali watched very closely how he promoted himself, the event, how he interacted with the fans, his style, his manner, his aura. And he decided that night he was going to copy it exactly, but he knew that to sell boxing tickets, to sell tickets to that kind of a sport, you needed to be over the top a little bit.
And there was nothing like that, right? I mean, every actress, every actor, every Marilyn Monroe, every presidential candidate, every Frank Sinatra, every movie star, every teen idol, every Elvis had to be humble, right? It was part of the religion. It was part of the code. It was part of the business. Was you need to be the nicest, most magnanimous person. That's how you get on television. That's how you get on Ed Sullivan. Right? I mean, during all of that era, even the Beatles, they were outlandish for their haircuts, but they were nice young British lads, right? And there was nothing like what we've seen in the proliferation of the hip-hop era, right? Where it's me, I. Ali set forth so many of those cultural boats, and for that, he was hated in the beginning, right? I mean, Ali gave Donald Trump everything he's doing right now, quite frankly, right?
Well, you're right on so many fronts there, though that's a very good observation. Also, Ali, first of all, let's just talk about the sports aspect. Athletes, like the rest of entertainers, they were supposed to be humble or perceived to be humble. And athletes didn't talk about themselves. They didn't boast. They didn't brag. They didn't predict when they were going to destroy their opponent. And so Ali, from that perspective, was more than a breath of fresh air. He was cutting edge, setting a new agenda and trend for athletes. But also, he was a black man doing it. Remember, he's not a white guy doing it. He's black.
Oh, and he's also black and not going to the war that everyone else is waving the flag for, too.
Well, we get to that, but let's just stick to the racial thing, which is huge. I mean, it's a black man boasting. How dare he? Who does he think he is? He's uppity. And it also gave black Americans a voice that I don't think they knew they had, certainly the majority of them, the vast majority. And it allowed them, the phrase, and I remember this phrase because I'm old enough, black is beautiful. Ali really ushered that in. He allowed black people to feel proud about the way they looked and who they were and their ancestry when, it was all wrapped up in a lot of ugly stuff for more than a century. So there's that aspect of it. Then he was the proverbial quote-unquote draft dodger on top of it. And we know what all that means. And I always thought that was a bit of a easy, cheap way for people to criticize Ali, who really didn't like the fact that he was boastful and he was black. I really believe that's what was behind a lot of it. But then they could conveniently tag on, he's also un-American and he's a black Muslim. And what's a black Muslim? Back then, the average American, they couldn't told you anything about Islam or the sect of black Muslims.
Well, and they also didn't have the internet to look it up either.
Well, sure. So Ali was really at the forefront, at the very forefront of a major social, political, religious transformation, the way people thought of the war, which was proved to be a disaster, and his conviction was overturned by the Supreme Court. So the U.S. government hounded him, and they wanted to throw him in jail, and he lost his ability to earn a living because his license was yanked. And for 3.5 years of his prime as an athlete, as a heavyweight champion, he was basically relegated to the trash heap in America. And he was, it's interesting to see the arc of his experience in America. He went from being an unknown young black child in Louisville, Kentucky, who grew up under, in very modest, lower middle income standards, to being an Olympic hero. And we all know what that means when you win the gold medal for your country, to coming back to Louisville with the gold medal and being refused service in a restaurant because of the color of his skin. And that told Ali, nothing's changed. I fought for my country in terms of the Olympics, and I come back and nothing's changed because of the color of my skin. And so right away, he was right for somebody like Malcolm X and the black Muslims, and they were smart enough in their own way, some might say devious, to latch on to Ali's coattails. But real quickly, back to the draft dodger thing, which I always thought was a bit of a misnomer. Ali could have done what Joe Louis did in World War II. He could have acquiesced to the U.S. government and be used as a pawn for an unjust cause, and used to look who's fighting with us, Muhammad Ali. We've got the heavyweight champion, and used as just propaganda. And they would have given him a cushy assignment. He wasn't going to see the front line. He wasn't going to go to Phnom Penh. He wasn't going to be in the jungles of Cambodia. That wasn't going to happen. So he could have had it easy over there. But he, to his own detriment in terms of his ability to earn a living and how he was castigated by America, he took the hard road. He really did. So he wasn't a draft dodger. He was following his religious beliefs and conscience that going over there to kill people, even though he wouldn't have been doing that per se, but he would have been supporting the cause and the slaughter of innocent people, he wasn't going to do that. And who could not admire somebody who gave up what he gave up for something he believed was unjust, and then was punished and vilified? And then, of course, Ali came back, and the metamorphosis continued. His popularity, was not what it had been, but he still became a popular champion again because of the fights against Frazier and Foreman in these titanic battles in the ring. And then, post-career, people saw his physical condition deteriorating and became frail. Not at first. And remember, Nestor, this is a man who had Parkinson's for about 40% of his life on the planet.
Yeah, I say that the story is incredible. John Saraceno joining us here, formerly USA Today. You can follow him out on Twitter at Johnny Saraceno. The thing's Shakespearean, right? I mean, the last half of his life, the most boisterous, toughest guy, sat very, very quietly and observed the world like a Buddha, right? I mean, literally had not very much to say, and most people's last memory is that shaking arm lighting that torch, which is now 20 years ago. It's amazing that he lived another 20 years, but the power with which he left the planet and what you saw in Louisville and the impact that he's made that we're still talking about and will be talking about as a true original for a long, long time. But there is this, from a writer storyline, there's a real tragedy at the end of all of this, right?
I don't know about that. I don't. I agree with everything you said until you got to the word tragedy.
Okay.
Because I don't see Ali as a tragic figure. First of all, we don't know that his physical condition was caused by boxing. I know you didn't say that.
See, I would
but
say it's
most
tragic. I would
people-
argue that just because if you had to live 20 years like that, it would be a tragedy for you. Even, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it would. And
Yeah.
look, I'm not taking anything away from Ali. I mean, nobody had a better life than Ali. I mean, hell,
Right.
Elvis has been dead 40 years ago, but he did a pretty good
Right.
job. He lived his.
And
you know.
trust me, Ali told me many times, even when he had Parkinson's, he wouldn't have done anything differently. So that's why people, it's fine to have empathy and maybe and sympathy for Ali, but he didn't want pity, and that's why he wouldn't do certain things in public. Now, again, his Parkinson's was diagnosed in the early mid-'80s. So the first 10 years, he actually got around, did quite a bit of traveling, and he could communicate. Wasn't like but I think people, as the disease progressed, and I don't know look, I'm not a doctor, but that's a long time to have Parkinson's, like almost 35 years, right? So he had the best of care, much like a former president. He had the best of care, the best of doctors. His wife, Lonnie, his fourth wife, she really adored and worshipped him and really extended his life so that he could be 74. But I think towards the end, it was difficult for him, Nestor, the final, I would say, probably the final 5 years was since late, 2000s, 2010. I went to stay with him in Phoenix for the magazine we did. He was having a hard time feeding himself. His communication, he really wasn't talking.
And that was 6 years ago.
Yeah,
wow.
He was embarrassed. Ali was embarrassed. See that.
How long have you known him? I mean, did you know him in the early 80s?
30 years. I knew him 30 years plus. I met him when I was at USA Today, and I went to Miami Beach to do a cover story on the anniversary of the Liston fight, winning the championship at the convention center. And we drove around in the city with Howard Bingham, his best friend, and he took me to the barber shops, and we went to the convention center.
Was that for ESPN? Was that on video?
No,
no?
USA Today. No, we're talking early 80s. You know what I'm saying? They're really, now it would have been blown up huge. I would have had video and no. But anyway, his last 5-8 years were extremely difficult for him. And something Lonnie explained to me that really wasn't talked about much is that Parkinson's patients, like a lot of patients that have debilitating illnesses, they go through depression. And Ali was depressed for, I don't know what percentage of time because I couldn't guess, but he was battling that. Again, for the reasons you stated. He was one of the most loquacious, controversial, outspoken, the Louisville Lip. He was known for talking.
Hey, I talk for a living. If you took away my ability to talk
right?
for 20 years and sat me in a chair to watch it, that would be a tragedy for me. I mean, maybe I'd accept it. Maybe. I mean, I've watched my wife go through hell and back and almost die twice in the last 2 years. So, I mean, I've seen that. And, when you witness it up close, I think it's easy from afar. But for a guy like you who loved him as a kid and watched him box and then really got to know him, it's a whole different, it's like O.J. Berganson, what we see here in Baltimore. It's a whole different level of watching someone deteriorate. And at least for him, I mean, his fame was transcendent, but we didn't see a lot of images of what you're talking about where he couldn't feed himself. Because I remember the 60 Minutes piece they showed when he passed 2 weeks ago about him leaving the room and saying, I don't want people to pity me. And I certainly can identify with that.
Yeah. Here's what I would say, and that's why I don't think it's a tragedy. I think it's sad that somebody who had so much to offer in so many ways was silenced at the end of his life. I think it's sad. But Ali touched millions of people, and anybody who came in contact with him for any amount of time, I think, is a better person, particularly if they listened to him and watched him. So,
boy, that's a hell of a thing to say about anybody, right? I mean, that's as kind a thing as you could say about any human being, John, really.
Yeah. I mean, the longer you were around him, I think the more you were touched by him, and the more Ali was about love, which is ironic because he knocked people out and was a professional fighter. But Ali was never. You had to kind of know him. I mean, Ali, he was even a little bit of a scaredy cat, believe it or not. He retained that boyishness about him. He loved humor. He loved to make people laugh. He loved to tease people. He loved to put on. He loved to be admired. He loved the attention. He really did. He was an attention whore. And I say that with love. Because he was Ali, imagine if he could walk in his shoes for a day. I don't even know what his life was really like to be that famous, respected, beloved. Certainly not by everybody. There could be people listening to this interview right now saying, Saraceno, you couldn't be further from the truth. I despise that man. And there are people that feel like that. And believe me, when I used to write columns occasionally, because he was out of the news, but at USA Today, they had my email address at the bottom of the column. You should have read some of the bigoted, hateful comments I got about what
there's no doubt about that. I see it on Facebook every day. I mean, the world has expanded enough to let everyone's bigotry fly, right?
Exactly.
Johnny Saraceno joining us here. He's out on Twitter. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure everybody knows who you are, John.
Yep. So Ali, like you used the word transcendent. He was a transcendental figure. He was not perfect, and he'd be the first one to say it. In fact, he told me many a times, I think I put this in my story on Monday's USA Today, I want to go to heaven. That's why I do good deeds. In other words, that was like a big thing in his life. He was that spiritual. Like he wanted, in his vision of the life thereafter, to be in paradise. And he realized he hadn't always done the right things. He hadn't always been a nice person. He hadn't always lived up to the Islamic ideal. Okay, so he worked on it, though. He became a different and a better person. Like he gained wisdom. And Ali had a heart. He had a real heart. He loved children. He really loved his family, and he has 9 children. They used to, keep in communication with him, video, emails, phone calls, and they were very saddened by what they saw happening to their father. But in the end, Ali touched people in a way that, let's face it, do athletes or former athletes really have that kind of connection with people? In fact, they're just the opposite. There's many of them, I'm not going to say all of them, and I understand why. I've been around a lot of them, and I know a lot of them. They get pestered to death. They get asked for favors. They get asked for this, that, and the other thing. They're also given a lot, too. And in the end, a lot of them just don't want to deal with the public because it's become one of those the burdens of celebrity is dealing with the public. But for Ali, it was never, ever a burden. And people sensed that. When you saw him or met him, he would welcome you with his eyes. And I watched it many times. Complete stranger.
Well, I met him once, and he was in your company, and I think Jerry Eisenberg at the Super Bowl in Atlanta watching the Mike Tyson fight in the Super Bowl Media Center. He was brought in, and there were 300 media people, and, I'm like, I'm going to go get my picture taken with Ali. Why wouldn't I? And he was incredibly kind to me, but he was at that point where he wasn't talking, you know what I mean?
Right.
He was nodding and smiling and hanging out, but, I got my picture taken with him because – he was larger than life to me, and I've said this for 2 weeks after his death. My father hated him. You know what I mean? My father would have been the guy writing you the nasty note,
Yeah. Yeah, my dad used to say we'd be watching the fights on TV, and he goes, he would say, in fact, I think I wrote it, why doesn't he shut his big mouth? And that endeared, when you're young, you kind of want to be different than your parents. You kind of want to go against your parents in a lot of ways. You're trying to form your own personality and identity. You don't agree with what particularly from that generation. And it made me focus on Ali all that much more. I go, let me hear what Ali's saying, where my father would say that. I want to hear, why is my dad having that reaction? And it was very typical of people his age and generation. I mean, but Ali accepted that too in the end. I mean, he knew.
Well, they bought tickets too. They bought tickets to root for the other guy, right?
They did. Yes, they did. It goes back to our original point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
John Saraceno, my longtime friend. It's been too long. Tell everybody what you're doing, man. I mean, you left USA Today. I think of you with boxing. I thought you knew Ali pretty well, but I didn't realize how well you had known him. I know how intertwined you were with big boxing during the Tyson and the Holyfield and the Riddick Bowe era. And I feel like I've known you 25 years. But what happens when you leave? I mean, you're doing all sorts of stuff, AARP, and you're working on a documentary. Fill me in, man.
Yeah, basically, I've been freelancing. I still write some for USA Today. I also write for AARP Magazine Bulletin, which is the largest magazine in terms of circulation in the United States, because there's so many seniors, I guess. And believe me, if you're anywhere near 50, Nestor, you will start getting those mailers.
I turned 48 in October, and tell them to leave me alone. Stay away from me.
They won't. Oh, no, they'll pester the dickens out of you.
I'm from a Who song. I hope I die before I get old, right?
Yeah, but, today's 50 is more like, trust me, 30, 35 yesterday.
I think I'm going to write my memoirs before I'm 50. Like the next 2 years, I'm going to write, 50 weeks till 50 or something. I don't know. But
I like that.
What I've learned, like the Esquire magazine, what I've learned so far.
Idea. Yeah, 50 weeks to 50. I like it, or 50 days, or however you want to do it. But, yeah, so, I've had a nice time writing for them. And I've a year ago, I worked for a couple of weeks at the KBC TV affiliate in Vegas leading up to the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight and fight night. I did that a couple of weeks. I'd still do some radio. I'd love to do it full time, but as you well know, it's the business has changed dramatically, and it's a difficult medium to kind of break into.
Dude, you're the only guy I've talked to ever that says, I really want to work in radio. I
know, because I have a lot of friends like you that are in it, and they can't stand it. In fact,
I love it. No, I love it. I'm not in the radio business. I don't work for a bunch of a-holes with alphabet soup and have to answer to people at WBAL or CBS Radio,
Yeah, these are working for the big conglomerates.
If I worked for a conglomerate, I would suck. I mean, my show wouldn't be any good. I mean, when I worked at Sporting News and 101 Sports, everything they hired me to do, they didn't want me to do. So such is the way of the world, though, right?
It's corporate. Yeah, they've got it's formulaic, as you know. We could talk about this for hours, but
and we shall next time.
Yeah, I still do some TV for Sky Sports News in Europe. They're based out of London. They're owned by News Corp, and a partner of mine, Craig Mortali, formerly of ESPN, we're in the midst of trying to co-produce a documentary on, oddly enough, Muhammad Ali.
Oh, wow, okay.
There have been several documentaries done on Ali, including When We Were Kings by Leon Gass, which won an Academy Award, which was mostly because he had all this film footage of Zaire and Foreman that nobody had ever seen for like 20 years, and suddenly you had all this incredible footage in Africa of Ali, Foreman, the Mobutu, all this really incredible stuff. And so we're trying to do a different thing with Ali, and we've actually had a lot of support, including from Lonnie, his wife, and everybody who's read our script and treatment and seen our sizzle reel. Loves the concept, and like we believe it's original. So we're in the midst of now trying to raise investors, and we're going to do some crowdfunding. And because it's not a cheap thing to put together, it's not a boxing movie, but we do need to buy some rights to some of that Ali footage, and those rights are very expensive. But the bottom line is we're real excited about the project, and we really were. There's not a lot of money per se in documentaries, but we were doing it because Craig and I have the same passion for the subject matter and feel the same way about Ali.
By the way, I missed the funeral, and Billy Crystal's speech has shown up on my timeline 100 times. I haven't watched it yet. It just, the funeral came at the wrong time for me to sort of sit down and watch it all day. I was doing some other things, and but that's one of the things about life now. I'm finally getting around to watching vinyl. You know what I mean? You can get the things a little later on when they don't work into your life so much. Convince me I need to go watch the Billy Crystal piece because I've heard such incredible things about that.
Well, I've heard. He and I did a story for the USA Today magazine, which is back on the newsstands with Ali's obituary. It's updated, but there's a lot of stories that are timeless that remain in there. And the Crystal piece is one of them. In fact, when I spoke to Billy about it, we did a series of what Muhammad Ali means to me. And the book starts off with President Obama. That's the first one we have in there. We got the president to do it. And then we have Rashida Ali, one of his daughters. We've got Billy Crystal in there. I've got Charles Barkley that did one with me. Senator Orrin Hatch, who was very close to Muhammad. And I believe there was one more in there. But so what Billy said as he eulogized his friend, and I think he knew Ali over 40 years, were things that I have already heard and knew about from Billy. But Billy just captivated that crowd at the Yum Center to memorialize Ali. And, I'm not going to spoil it because it's out there and people should just listen to it and watch it and know that Billy Crystal loved Muhammad Ali and vice versa. In fact, Ali called him his little brother. They had a real strong relationship, and I had to wear sunglasses at this thing because I kept welling up. One speaker was better than the next speaker, and they were also touching. It was just, of all the events I was lucky enough to cover, sporting events over the years, that's at the top of my list now. Even though it wasn't I guess it's an event per se, but it had nothing to do with sports. And that day I will always cherish, and it's always going to be tinged with melancholy.
Hey, man, I appreciate you taking some time to talk about Ali, amongst other things. I'm going to bug you a little more often, man. You want to do some radio? I'll let you stretch out around here. I love sitting and talking with you. And you're still down in Northern Virginia?
We have a home in Northern Virginia, but I like to spend most of my time in Florida because I'm really a beach bum at heart.
What's wrong with that, dude? I mean, that's the American dream. Except when the hurricanes roll in, it's all good down there, right?
Yeah. So Virginia, has been my home for 3 decades plus. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, but I grew up on Lake Erie, so I was used to going to the beach as a kid, and then I worked in Florida, and I'm an inveterate beach bum, so I prefer to be in Florida.
Never, ever apologize to me for calling in from Florida. Only apologize that there's no video cam for you to show me the palm trees, Johnny, I appreciate it, man. It's always great having you on. I'm glad we found you. John Saraceno, longtime boxing writer as well as columnist at the USA Today. You can follow his journey at Johnny, that's Jonny, Saraceno, Sarceno, and the appreciation of Muhammad Ali. I appreciate you, Saraceno. We'll see you soon, pal.
Anytime, Nestor. Thank you.
You got it. John Saraceno, one of my favorite journalists out there in the boxing game, and it took me a week and a half, 2 weeks to find it, but I'm glad we did. Hats off to Ray Bachman for making that happen. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. You can also watch our Facebook Live stream now, as well as our WNS TV stream. So people ask me, when do you do radio? Well, now you're going to know when I'm doing it because you'll find it live on your Facebook feed. Morning newspaper comes to you at 7 a.m. each and every morning. Our WNST morning newspaper powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And last but never least, breaking news happens first on your mobile device, whether it's Orioles or Ravens, and we had both of those happen on Tuesday. Ups and downs and comings and goings and ACLs. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis is here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.